This is also a time of change for my family. Catherine becomes Queen Consort. In recognition of her own loyal public service, I know she will bring to the demands of her new role the steadfast devotion to duty on which I have come to rely.
7 minutes ago, a sealed palace statement transformed the future of the British monarchy. Without ceremony, warning, or room for negotiation, officials confirmed that Catherine would immediately assume the position publicly associated with the Queen, replacing Camilla in royal duties, precedence, and national representation. Behind the announcement stood a devastated family, a stunned household, and one unanswered question: what happened inside the palace to force such a historic decision? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Buckingham Palace moved with stunning speed. The declaration confirmed that Catherine would become the monarchy's principal female representative, meaning the senior woman chosen to support the sovereign at major national, diplomatic, and ceremonial events. Her engagements expanded immediately. Her access to state briefings widened. Her place beside Charles was secured, while appearances once assigned to Camilla quietly vanished from the official calendar. This was not preparation for some distant future. The transfer had already begun. Catherine read the first paragraph twice. William sat beside her in the private room, watching the shock settle across her face as she lowered the document and whispered that the decision would change far more than her own life. The prince did not smile. He placed his hand over hers and told her they had to remain calm, because celebration would turn another woman's humiliation into spectacle. She nodded, but the weight of the announcement had already reached her. Camilla received the news differently. A senior courtier entered, closed the door, and handed her a one-page briefing minutes before publication. The Queen Consort scanned the final lines, then looked up sharply when she understood that her permission had never been requested. Her scheduled duties were gone. Her ceremonial precedence, the official order determining where senior royals stand and appear, had been reassigned. She asked whether Charles had approved every word. The courtier answered yes. Charles sat alone after signing the authorization. The king removed his glasses, placed the pen beside the document, and said nothing while the communications team prepared the release. He knew the order protected the institution, yet he also understood what it might destroy inside his marriage. Duty had demanded a signature, but it offered no comfort afterward. Then one sentence changed everything. The document stated that the transfer followed an irreversible breakdown in confidence within the senior household. That phrase revealed that this was not a routine adjustment. As the statement reached the public, William received a second sealed folder containing a documented account of the private incident that had ended all trust. Catherine saw the label, and her expression tightened. Camilla would know exactly who had spoken. The announcement may have changed Catherine's position in a matter of minutes, but its true force could only be understood by examining what each person stood to gain, lose, or never recover. To the public, the decision appeared to be a sudden transfer of royal responsibility. Inside the family, it felt like something far more personal. A judgment on loyalty, sacrifice, marriage, and survival. Catherine was being elevated. Camilla was being displaced. William was being forced to protect the future, and Charles was confronting the cost of a choice only he could authorize. The crown had become a dividing line between four wounded people. Catherine had never built her position through open ambition. She had spent years earning trust through discipline, silence, and an ability to remain steady whenever the family around her appeared close to breaking. That history mattered because her expanded authority was not being presented as a reward. It was the consequence of becoming indispensable when the monarchy needed stability. The new royal arrangement, the official division of duties, access, and ceremonial responsibilities inside the household, simply acknowledged the influence she had already earned. Camilla saw the same decision as an erasure. She had endured decades of rejection, public criticism, and uncertainty before finally securing her place beside Charles. Now the Queen Consort believed that everything she had survived was being reduced to a brief statement and an altered calendar. Her duties were disappearing, but the deeper wound came from the fear that her entire journey would be remembered only as a temporary chapter before Catherine's rise. Catherine stopped outside the briefing room with William beside her. She admitted that she felt sorrow, not triumph, because every new responsibility placed in her hands had first been removed from someone else. The prince chose his words carefully. He told her that accepting duty did not mean celebrating another woman's humiliation, and she could protect the future without becoming cruel. She looked at him, took one slow breath, and entered the room. Charles carried a different burden. During a private conversation recorded in his equerry's written account, the king confessed that loyalty to one relationship could no longer be allowed to damage every other bond surrounding the throne. He still loved his wife, but he knew that protecting her position at any cost could deepen the fracture with William and place Catherine under constant pressure. Camilla felt that fracture when aides began clearing documents from her official desk. She stopped one staff member from lifting a framed photograph of Charles, took it into her own hands, and held it against her chest. Then she asked the question no one wanted to answer. Had the monarch defended her during the final meeting? The silence told her enough. William had resisted humiliating language for months. He supported Catherine's expanded role, but rejected every phrase that sounded like punishment. A compromise had even been prepared that would have allowed Camilla to keep a limited ceremonial position. Charles refused it, only after one royal occasion exposed a boundary that could no longer be ignored. To understand why compromise disappeared, the story must return to the ceremony that transformed private mistrust into an irreversible royal crisis. Weeks before the announcement, the senior royals gathered for what should have been a controlled display of unity. The schedule had been approved, the positions assigned, and every movement rehearsed. Yet one private instruction issued moments before the ceremony shattered that illusion. Catherine was asked to step aside, William refused to ignore it, and Charles finally saw that the struggle around him was no longer about etiquette. It was about who controlled the monarchy's future. Tension had been rising for months. Catherine's influence in state planning, charitable strategy, and royal representation had grown because senior advisors increasingly trusted her judgment during moments of instability. Camilla felt the shift with every briefing redirected toward William and his wife. Palace staff tried to prevent open conflict by dividing responsibilities, allowing the queen consort to retain traditional ceremonial duties while the princess took a larger role in long-term planning. The arrangement looked balanced, but it depended on boundaries neither side could afford to break. Camilla broke one of them during a Commonwealth reception at Buckingham Palace. The event brought representatives from Commonwealth nations together and required the senior royals to greet them in an official receiving line. Moments before the doors opened, she privately instructed the Master of Ceremonies to remove Catherine from the position beside Charles and place her several spaces back. She did not consult the king. She did not inform William. She simply expected the order to be obeyed. Catherine learned of the change only minutes before entering. She asked the official whether the instruction had come directly from Charles. When he hesitated, she understood the truth. Her expression tightened, but she refused to create a public scene. That restraint protected the ceremony. Yet it also made the insult more painful, because she knew the decision had been designed to diminish her without giving her time to respond. William found Camilla in a side corridor and asked her to reverse the order. The prince kept his voice low, but his anger was unmistakable. She refused, and insisted that Catherine needed to remember that seniority could not be rewritten through popularity. He answered that the future could not be managed through humiliation, and the queen consort warned him not to confuse public affection with constitutional authority. Charles heard the final words from behind a partially closed door. Later, the king requested the written chain of instructions, meaning the documented record showing who approved each change. The papers revealed that Camilla's office had presented the alteration as though it carried his personal consent. That discovery cut deeper than the insult itself, because his authority had been used without permission. Charles summoned his private secretary that evening. He placed the altered ceremony plan on the desk and ordered a complete review of Camilla's formal powers. The review soon uncovered a pattern of interference, not one isolated decision, and it forced him to arrange the meeting where every hidden grievance would finally explode. What began as a silent change in a receiving line was about to become a confrontation where no title, marriage, or carefully rehearsed smile could protect anyone. The confrontation took place without cameras, secretaries, or ceremonial protection. Charles sat at one end of the room, Camilla opposite him, while William and Catherine occupied the space between loyalty and accusation. On the table lay the altered reception plan and a collection of private directives issued over several months. For years, the family had survived by avoiding certain truths. That afternoon, every carefully buried grievance was finally spoken aloud. Charles moved first. The king slid the Commonwealth reception plan across the table and asked why his authority had been attached to an instruction he never approved. The document traced the official order for the ceremony, including who stood where and who greeted each guest. Camilla glanced at the page but refused to touch it. Her silence hardened the room, because everyone understood this was no longer about one changed position. It was about trust. William broke that silence. The prince explained that Catherine's office had faced repeated late changes, withdrawn invitations, and revised seating arrangements over several months. Each decision seemed small on its own, yet together, they formed a pattern designed to weaken her public role. The future king spoke carefully, but his anger was clear. He said the family could no longer dismiss repeated humiliation as routine protocol. Camilla turned toward Catherine. She accused her of allowing public affection to grow into political power, and insisted that popularity had begun rewriting the royal order around her. Catherine held her gaze and answered quietly that she had never asked to replace anyone. She had accepted responsibilities given to her, and she would not apologize for serving when the monarchy required her. Charles looked at his wife, and asked whether she understood what the deception had done to his trust. Camilla's control finally cracked. She told him that she had spent years defending their relationship against rejection and judgment, only to watch another woman gradually take the place she had fought to secure. The queen consort said she would not disappear, simply because the future had become more convenient. William placed both hands on the table. He warned that Catherine would no longer face private attacks disguised as protocol. The prince was speaking as her husband, but also as the future king, and everyone heard the difference. He made clear that protecting her was now part of protecting the crown itself. Charles opened another file. Palace records showed several unauthorized interventions carrying implied royal approval, including one directive that attempted to block Catherine from state correspondence intended for the heir's household. State correspondence meant official papers prepared for William's royal work, making the interference far more serious than a seating dispute. Camilla demanded that Charles choose between defending his wife and surrendering control to the next generation. After a long silence, the monarch replied that the crown could not survive by protecting conduct that was tearing the family apart. He announced no punishment. Instead, he asked Camilla to leave and told William and Catherine to remain. The door closed behind Camilla, but the power struggle did not leave with her. It shifted into the hands of the three people now deciding the monarchy's future. Royal power rarely moves through dramatic speeches. It moves through signatures, access, precedents, calendars, and the right to stand beside the sovereign when the nation is watching. After Camilla left the confrontation, Charles faced a decision that would define his reign. William demanded permanent safeguards. Catherine urged restraint. And behind the closed doors of the palace, a constitutional mechanism was prepared to transfer influence without allowing another internal rebellion. Charles held more authority than the public usually saw. The king could reorganize the working structure of his household, reassign ceremonial duties, and decide which senior royal represented the crown at major national and diplomatic events. Those choices mattered because public position shaped real influence. Whoever received the briefings, stood beside the sovereign, and led official engagements became the visible center of royal power. William understood that reality. As heir, meaning the person next in line to the throne, the prince carried enormous weight in every decision concerning the monarchy's future. Palace advisors had warned that continued conflict between his household and Charles's could damage public confidence. A divided family was painful. A divided crown was dangerous. Charles remained seated after the others left. His private secretary waited beside the unsigned authorization until the monarch finally admitted that the document might protect the institution while permanently damaging his marriage. He stared at the final page, knowing every line would be felt by Camilla as rejection, even if the language avoided blame. Catherine asked him not to strip his wife of dignity. She proposed that the announcement focus on continuity, service, and stability rather than punishment. Her restraint surprised the king. The woman being elevated was defending the privacy of the woman being displaced, and that choice convinced him she could carry power without turning it into revenge. William was less willing to trust another quiet agreement. He insisted on written limits preventing any royal office from changing Catherine's duties, correspondence, or ceremonial position without approval from the sovereign or heir. The future king had watched informal promises fail before. This time, he wanted protection that could not be ignored behind closed doors. Palace lawyers prepared a senior representation order, a formal household document transferring major public and ceremonial responsibilities from one senior royal to another. It placed Catherine at the center of state ceremonies, diplomatic receptions, national occasions, and royal coordination, while moving Camilla into a private supporting role. The order required no resignation. Once Charles signed it, the change would begin immediately. Charles lifted the pen and paused. He asked Catherine whether she understood the loneliness attached to such authority. She answered that duty was not a reward, and never should be treated as one. The king looked toward William, then signed. Before the ink had dried, officials began changing schedules, briefings, and access lists. Camilla learned the full scale of the decision, not from Charles, but when her name vanished from the following morning's state briefing. The authority had changed hands on paper. Now the palace would feel the brutal reality of that decision, room by room, desk by desk, and relationship by relationship. The fallout did not arrive with shouting. It arrived through an empty diary, a cancelled briefing, and aides who suddenly avoided eye contact. By sunrise, Camilla's name had disappeared from meetings she had expected to lead. Catherine's office received documents once delivered elsewhere, while staff members began shifting their allegiance toward the new center of royal authority. The transfer was official, but its human cost became visible in one painfully quiet morning. Camilla learned the first change before breakfast. Her scheduled state briefing had been cancelled, and invitations requiring the monarchy's senior female representative had already been redirected to Catherine. Several members of her team were told to report temporarily to the Prince and Princess of Wales's office. That office supported William and his wife in their official duties, so the instruction made the shift in power impossible to misunderstand. The royal diary changed next. Catherine's name appeared beside Charles at an upcoming diplomatic reception, printed exactly where Camilla's had stood the night before. Every official who opened the schedule could see what had happened. This mattered, because the royal diary did more than list appointments. It showed who carried authority, who represented the crown, and who had been left behind. Camilla entered her working office and stopped. The red briefing boxes had not arrived. Those boxes carried confidential papers prepared for senior royals, and their absence told her more than any speech could. She called for her private secretary, who explained that the documents had been rerouted under the signed order. The queen consort gripped the back of a chair but refused to sit. Camilla asked whether Charles had personally approved every change. Her secretary answered that the king had signed the complete authorization. She dismissed the staff, closed the door, and remained silent until she was alone. Only then did her control break. The woman who had fought for decades to secure her place finally understood that the palace had already begun functioning without her. Catherine received the same briefing boxes in another wing. She placed her hand on the top folder, but could not open it immediately. William watched her struggle with the weight of what had passed into her hands. She told the prince that the palace felt as though it was mourning, while everyone continued working. He reminded her that hesitation proved she understood the cost, but responsibility could not be refused simply because it had arrived through pain. A longtime member of Camilla's household then requested a private audience with Charles. During that documented meeting, the aide produced copies of instructions missing from the original review. The papers showed preparations to exclude Catherine from a future state occasion entirely, and replace her with a representative chosen by the Queen Consort's office. Charles read every page. The king now knew the conflict would have continued, and the order could neither be softened nor reversed. Yet before the announcement became public, he still had to face Camilla alone, not as monarch and consort, but as husband and wife. The machinery of the palace had already moved on, but one private conversation remained, and it would determine whether the family emerged with dignity or complete emotional ruin. That night, titles were left outside the door. There were no advisors, no documents, and no children present to soften the truth. Charles entered Camilla's private sitting room, knowing that he had removed the public role she had spent years waiting to hold. She faced him, knowing that anger could no longer reverse the order. What followed was not another royal confrontation, but the painful reckoning of two people whose love could no longer shield them from consequence. Charles entered without knocking, and found Camilla seated beside an untouched dinner tray. The king carried a folder beneath his arm, but he placed it on a distant table before sitting down. That small choice mattered. He had not come to deliver another command from the sovereign, meaning the monarch who carries the crown's highest authority. He had come as her husband, though both of them knew the decision between them could not be separated from the throne. Camilla spoke first. She told him the palace had taken away her purpose while still expecting her to remain silent, loyal, and grateful. The queen consort said she had endured years of public rejection only to lose everything once she had finally secured it. Charles answered that the order had not ended their marriage, but her repeated use of his authority had made it impossible for him to defend her public position. Camilla asked whether he had chosen Catherine because the younger woman was more admired. Charles rejected the accusation immediately. The king said he had chosen stability because personal affection could not be allowed to control the structure of the crown. Catherine's popularity had not forced the decision. The repeated damage to trust had. Camilla reached for the ceremonial brooch prepared for the next diplomatic reception. Such a reception is an official gathering where the royal family welcomes foreign representatives on behalf of Britain. She removed the piece, placed it on the table between them, and said Catherine would need it more than she would. Charles closed his hand around it but could not answer. Camilla finally admitted what had driven her: fear. She feared being displaced, judged, and remembered as temporary. The queen consort confessed that every attempt to protect her position had pushed the family further away, creating the exact ending she had spent years trying to prevent. Charles then revealed the details she had not expected. In a documented private request, Catherine had asked the palace to protect Camilla's residence, family life, and personal dignity. The king explained that the woman treated as a rival had argued against harsher consequences. Camilla lowered her voice and asked why she would do that. He replied that power without mercy would only continue the damage. Camilla agreed not to challenge the announcement or encourage her staff to resist. Charles promised the statement would not describe her removal as punishment. Before he left, she asked whether Catherine was ready. The monarch answered that readiness was not the absence of fear. It was choosing duty despite it. By morning, the announcement was released. With the private battle finally surrendered, the palace opened its gates to a public reaction more immediate, emotional, and divided than anyone inside had prepared to face. Within minutes, the palace statement escaped the silence of royal corridors and became the only story Britain could discuss. Newsrooms abandoned planned broadcasts. Crowds gathered outside royal residences. Supporters called the decision a generational turning point, while others saw the sadness of a woman losing the position she had struggled to attain. Then one newspaper front page appeared, capturing the entire upheaval in a single image that neither Catherine nor Camilla could ignore. National broadcasters interrupted regular programming to explain what had changed. Catherine had become the monarchy's principal female representative, placing her beside Charles at state occasions, and formally ahead of Camilla in public royal duties. Ceremonial precedence meant the official order determining where senior royals stand, enter, and appear during major events. That detail mattered because royal position was not merely symbolic. It shaped access, authority, and the image of who now carried the institution forward. Commentators described the decision as the clearest sign yet that power was shifting toward William and his wife. The prince stood closer than ever to the center of royal control, while Catherine now carried responsibilities once associated with Camilla. Constitutional experts stressed that the legal line of succession had not changed. William remained the heir, but the household surrounding the crown had been transformed. Outside Buckingham Palace, the reaction became painfully real. A crowd gathered beneath the balcony shortly after the statement was released. Some people held photographs of Catherine, while others watched in silence as the gates closed. One woman arrived carrying flowers intended for Camilla. She hesitated, lowered the bouquet, and placed it against the rail without saying a word. The following morning, the Crown Chronicle published a split front page. Catherine appeared beneath the headline, "A New Queen Steps Forward," while Camilla was placed under the smaller words, "The End of an Era." The image turned a private family wound into a national verdict, and no other woman could escape it. Catherine saw the newspaper during breakfast and immediately turned it face down. She told William the cover was cruel because it transformed another woman's pain into her victory. The future king agreed, reminding her that the public would judge not only how she accepted power, but how she treated the person who had lost it. Camilla received the same paper in her private rooms. She studied the front page without speaking, then asked an aide to send Catherine the ceremonial brooch she had removed the night before. The queen consort offered no public statement. The gesture carried the message she could not bring herself to say aloud. Catherine wore that brooch at her first appearance under the new arrangement. When she stepped beside Charles, the crowd responded with approval, but the king noticed the piece immediately. He understood that she had chosen continuity over humiliation. The public had witnessed the transfer of power. The final meaning of the moment would be revealed by how Catherine carried it, and how Camilla chose to let it go. The story did not end with a winner standing over a defeated rival. It ended with four people confronting what the crown demands when private fear collides with public duty. Catherine accepted a position she had never openly pursued. Camilla surrendered the authority she had tried too desperately to preserve. William protected the future, while Charles accepted responsibility for a decision that saved the monarchy's stability at a profound personal cost. Catherine formally assumed responsibility for the monarchy's senior female representation, state support, ceremonial leadership, and coordination with William's household. That role made her the leading woman supporting the sovereign during major national occasions and official duties. The transition was no longer hidden inside palace documents. Government officials recognized it, royal staff followed it, and the public had accepted that the center of authority had changed. Catherine paused beside William before entering her first full state reception. She admitted that she still felt the pain behind the position now placed in her hands. The prince reminded her that history would not judge her only by the announcement, it would judge how she behaved after receiving power. She nodded, knowing restraint would now matter as much as strength. Catherine entered wearing Camilla's brooch and took her designated place beside Charles. A state reception is a formal gathering where the monarchy welcomes senior national or international guests on behalf of the country. The king noticed the piece immediately and gave her a brief nod before the doors opened. He was acknowledging both the authority he had transferred and the burden she had agreed to carry. Camilla watched the opening from her private residence. The queen consort did not turn away when Catherine appeared beside the monarch. Instead, she closed the newspaper carrying the cruel headline and told her companion that resisting the decision would only cause greater damage. Her surrender was painful, but it was finally honest. Charles understood his own failure more clearly. The king accepted that delaying action had allowed fear, rivalry, and mistrust to deepen. Protecting his marriage had mattered, but leadership required boundaries before private conflict consumed the institution. William reached the same conclusion from another direction. The future king had defended his wife with firmness, yet he now knew preserving the family demanded compassion. Catherine's first internal order proved what kind of queen she intended to become. In a documented instruction to the household, she protected Camilla's charitable projects, staff support, residence, and personal dignity. She refused to destroy the legacy of the woman she had replaced. Camilla's fall revealed the danger of treating royal position as personal possession. Catherine's rise showed that lasting authority comes through trust, discipline, mercy, and service. The palace had chosen the future over resentment and duty over fear. And as Catherine stood beside the king, wearing the brooch sent by the woman she had replaced, the monarchy delivered its final judgment. Power may be transferred by a signature, but the right to carry it must be earned through character. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.